Welcome to Pigeon River Farm, doing farming right. I'm Robert Brown, the owner of Pigeon River Farm. Thank you for viewing. Well, good evening. In tonight's episode, we're going to talk about frost seeding and why frost seeding is like rolling the dice. I've frost seeded our pastures many times, talked to many people that are involved with frost seeding, and it is definitely rolling the dice, but it's the most inexpensive, one of the best things you can do for your pastures. Where the risk comes in with frost seeding methodology and going in during the winter time, or I should say early spring, not winter time, but early spring. In our area here, central Wisconsin, it is the middle of March. Typically that is the window, plus or minus a little bit, is when you have to get out there. And where the risk is, where rolling the dice comes in, is actually the cost of the seed. And I'll speak specifically for this year. Seed has gone through the stratosphere, so it is really, really expensive and very difficult to get. So in all the years that I have frost seeded, this one was the biggest throwing the dice that I guess a guy could have had. It was a big expense, and the weather wasn't with me. I'll have two examples here. Last year's frost seeding was in the beginning of March. The weather was absolutely in my favor. We just come off the snowpack. The snowpack was melted. I was able to get out there on frozen ground, get my seeding in early in the morning, and without any issues of getting the tractor stuck, doing any damage, any rutting, anything of that nature. This year, on the other hand, was totally different. Beginning of March was extremely warm after the snowpack melted. Left a lot of ponding in the field. Then once that occurred, the frost started to come out, so the word was impossible to get out there. We did a lot of damage and actually get the tractor stuck. So my options were very limited. So I patiently waited. Now we're virtually at the very end of March. So I'm getting a little bit deep into the month where I'd like to be, but we had extreme cold. So you see I was out on a small tractor. It was 14 degrees Fahrenheit this morning when I was out there, but we got her done because I couldn't take the risk of taking a big tractor out there since we've already had a fair amount of thawing. So let's get into talking about not only what I'm doing, but the whole wisdom and theory behind frost seeding. What we do with frost seeding is we go out and we basically broadcast the seed onto the frozen ground. And I think, well, that's simple. It is very simple. But what we're going to basically, our goal and objective here is to get the soil to absorb the seed. How is that going to happen? Well, you need the perfect cycle. You need barren or semi-barren ground, meaning no snow located on it, or ice sheets or such. Next, you need to do is you're going to have a series of hot and cold, in other words, above and below freezing. The perfect scenario is when you have the days that are going to be in the 30s and the nights that are in the 20s. So every night the ground freezes, every day it thaws out. Well, that thawing and freezing cycles virtually draw the small grass seeds down into the pasture or into your soil. Works amazingly well. So the secret there is having the weather forecast. So Mother Nature's got to work with you. So last year it was almost perfect. Early part, and then if you get a bonus would be a snow on top. So if you get a few frost cycles, a little bit of snow, let's add a little nitrogen to it. The slow melting also pushes the seed in. And then of course there's a timing between the point at which your natural vegetation that's out there, remember you're typically, at least in this case here, I'm not taking barren ground, I'm actually just populating, changing the species buildup of the plants that I have for optimum grazing. So that's the goal. I'm not going to go into the discussion of what we planted. That can vary from year to year. It's high value seed, a variety of them, and we take an analysis during the summer. But the technique is critical. So setting up the distance at which the broadcaster runs, you got to look and see what kind of compaction you're going to have. Look at the long range forecast. We're going to need at least a week and a half of where we have some level of thaw and freeze. If it stays completely frozen, that's not going to be any good. You'll see on the pasture that I did this year, left the pasture a little bit longer. So the risk, there's another risk here, and that is when you frost seed, if you get a lot of wind, it can actually blow the seed away. So having a little bit longer pasture actually makes it easier for the seed to settle in. But one of the downside that it has to break down, the seed has to come up through in competition. So these are all the methodologies that I have found. But really what you're doing is you're making a financial roll of the dice. That decision has to be made consciously in comparison to no-till drilling. I do have some ground here I'm going to no-till drill in, but that has to mean once the soil is completely dried out, that's going to be around that April, latter part of April time period. But that is a little different model. But the frost seeding, inexpensive, limited risk on compaction and so on, so you get out there. So my recommendation is look into it, come up with a plan, a strategy. There's a lot of documentation out there on how to frost seed. You can take some of the advice. I got some demonstrations here you can see. The key on how at speed and so on, that's strictly a function of your seeder and how you're going to approach it. But remember, the secret to this is very, very simple. You need to have that freeze, thaw cycle is the key. So I thank you. Hope this information was beneficial, and have a most wonderful evening.